All right, good morning and happy Saturday, Deadball baseball fans. Anthony with Bleacher Bums Gaming, and we're here today with installment number 4 of Deadball Diaries, which of course is based on the actual, listen to and react comment on the actual audio recordings from Lawrence Ritter's classic 1966 book, The Glory of Their Times, in which we listen to the actual audio tapes of the players who were presented in the book and kind of jump in and make comments and interact with the stories, if you will, along the way. And in today's installment, we're going to enjoy Wahoo Sam Crawford, of course, a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest players of the Deadball era, and teammate of the legendary Cobb, and which he will discuss. And what's interesting about Sam is he was at the same time a very reclusive person, but also very, I don't want to say braggadocious, maybe very open about his Hall of Fame status. And you'll understand what I mean as Lawrence Ritter sets up the interview and what it took to track Sam down, which was kind of his Moby Dick of the players that he interviewed, if you will. So without further ado, got my coffee. Let's enjoy Wahoo Sam Crawford as he was interviewed by Larry Ritter. Here we go.
Sam Crawford turned out to be one of my closest friends. Sam was born in Wahoo, Nebraska in 1880. He was in the majors for 19 years, from 1899, which I always find still amazing, to 1917, mostly with the Detroit Tigers, when he was one of baseball's outstanding power hitters. He led his league in home runs 3 times and still holds the all-time lifetime record for triples. He was elected to baseball's Hall of Fame in 1957. I talked to Sam in Baywood Park, California. He really lived, he had a home anyway, in Hollywood, California, because I went there to find Sam, and he wasn't there. And his wife, Mary, said, well, Sam lives here only in name. He never comes here except very rarely because he doesn't like all the people around in the big city. He doesn't like to stand on lines for anything. So Sam lives north of here, and I asked her where he lived, and she wouldn't tell me. She said if she told me where he lived, he'd be mad at her, because he didn't want people to know where he lived. He didn't want people bothering him. But anyway, she finally, after much cajoling, she said, well, if you go north, it's about roughly halfway between here and San Francisco, and you can see the ocean. That's all she'd tell me. She was even unhappy about saying that much. So I started out, drove north, and
So a couple of things, and obviously there's more, but yeah, again, the all-time leader in triples, and that actually is a record which I'd say that's, to me, one of baseball's unbreakable records. Nobody's ever going to catch Sam. And surprising as well that it took so long for him to get elected into the Hall of Fame. He obviously wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I would have thought he would have gone at some point, probably maybe mid to late 40s. I mean, he was that good. And possibly part of that was been overshadowed by Cobb, who he played the majority of his career with. Or perhaps voters thought that he got more favorable pitches because of Cobb in the lineup. And, I don't know that theory holds any water, because back then it really wasn't a thing to pitch around batters. You kind of went at them, and, there wasn't a lot of intentional walks, nowhere near what you see in modern times. But yeah, just in a world now where we can't get to the other side of of our cities in some cases without the GPS in our iPhones or smartphones, whatever. Find it interesting that Mr. Ritter was given basically halfway between here and San Francisco, and you could see the ocean. It's kind of leaves a very wide swath of land to cover, and it's amazing that given that's all he really had to go by, he actually was able to locate Sam. But here, we'll continue.
Everywhere I drove after a certain distance, when I got close to the halfway mark to San Francisco, I stopped at real estate offices and post offices. Those were the two places I felt maybe I'd find. Every once in a while, I picked up his trail. Somebody would say, "Oh, that's the ball player that was here, remember?" They'd say to somebody in the office, "That's the ball player who was here, left that Hall of Fame card." Sam carried around a bunch of Hall of Fame cards with him, and it would have Sam's Hall of Fame plaque on it. And Sam would leave, so to speak, his calling card at different places and chit-chat with people and say, "I used to be a ball player," and give them the card. So every once in a while I'd encounter somebody who had one of Sam's cards, and they say, "Oh, well, he was here 2 weeks ago," or "He was here a month ago," or "He was here yesterday." So I kept trailing him. So finally I almost gave up, and I was at Baywood Park.
So that's the other interesting piece. Crawford moved to where he was currently living because he didn't want people bothering him, didn't want people around him. Yet I find it interesting that he carried around and dispersed his Hall of Fame card with his plaque on, and basically telling people, "Hey, I'm a famous ball player," was a famous ex-ball player. So yeah, it's kind of I guess a conflict within Sam's personality, that he both loathed attention but at the same time seemed to seek it out by passing out his Hall of Fame card. But I thought, that was just a cool little tidbit, and it speaks to how much Larry Ritter wanted to interview Crawford, because this journey, covering all that distance and going, various, like he said, real estate offices and post offices, where obviously there's no social media back then. You couldn't look up Sam's Facebook page and see he'd eaten at the Greasy Spoon Diner the night before, and so it was really a labor of love by Ritter to work that hard to track him down. And I would imagine this, doesn't mention it specifically, but I would imagine this took days, if not a couple, maybe even 3 weeks of just looking for a needle in a haystack. But we will get to the point where he finally does encounter him, and that's a fun story as well, because like he said, he was ready to give up, and it was honestly just by chance, and the odds of this happening are extreme, and as you'll see when you hear Larry relate this story.
Sitting in my car, thinking I better do a laundry, and this tall, gaunt fellow passed by with a whole stack of books. And I just idly watched him. He took them into a drugstore. It was one of these places where you trade used books, paperbacks. You take out a bunch and you bring in a bunch and trade. And Sam was bringing back a bunch of paperbacks, and he was taking out another bunch. But on the way, he had some laundry with him, and he stopped in the laundromat next door to the drugstore. So I had this laundry to do too, so I roused myself and went into the laundromat and put my laundry in next to this guy's laundry. And I sat down, and I had nothing to, might as well ask anybody I saw. I said, "Do you know anybody around here named Sam Crawford?" And he said, "I sure do." He says, "I ought to know him, being as it's me." That's how I met Sam Crawford. We became very close friends. Sam was a self-described nonconformist, and he and I hit it off perfectly. We spent a lot of time together. Sam was a very perceptive observer of the human condition. He was a voracious reader. He read everything, including philosophy and history, and, well, one reason he didn't like cities is that too many interferences with his reading. Sam was one of my favorite people of all time.
I can remember very well the first electric lights in our town, the Wahoo. On the corner, on the street corner, they'd have one little, what they call incandescent light. Just one loop of wire in the globe, and kind of a reddish thing. Us kids used to go down to the corner and see the light come on, at night. That was a big deal. What did your father do? He was in the Civil War. He had a store, a general store, just a little country store. They sold everything. I learned a trade there in Wahoo, the hard way.
Oh.
Cleaning cuspidors and washing windows and mopping the floor. And then once in a while they let you lather somebody. You know, get them ready for the real barbers. And then sometime maybe there'd be a tramp come through once on the haircut or something. We'd get to practice on it. That's the way we learned in those days.
Saturday was a big haircut
Yeah,
day.
that was big. Well, the farmers used to come in there Saturday nights, you know, with the hair on their shoulders and manure in their hair and hay seeds. And, you know, you worked all day Saturday and up to 12 o'clock Saturday night, standing on your feet around that chair. But in a long day.
That's worse than being an umpire.
Oh, Lord.
Was baseball a very well-known sport when you were growing up?
Oh, yes. There was a team. There's always a team in Wahoo. We made a trip overland in a wagon with a team of horses. We had 3 or 4 seats on there. And there was only about maybe 11 of us, 11, 12 of us. We had a cook, and it had a stove, and a tent. And we just started out around Nebraska there. I mean, challenge anybody, you know. It didn't make a difference.
It's a baseball game.
Yeah, a game, you know. One of the boys he was a musician. He was a cornet player. When we'd come into town, you know, we'd get out that cornet, you know, and he'd sound off. Coming into town, you know, people would come around and look and see what's going on. I'd say, ball game going to be on. And you just had a ball diamond out on the prairie somewhere. But we'd drive along the country roads, you know, and if we come to a stream, we'd go swimming. We'd come to an apple orchard, or we'd get apples, or, you know. We'd sleep anywhere. We lived on, they call it round steak. We used to get 3 pounds per quarter. And all he could cook was was this round steak and gravy and bread. That's all we had.
Let's talk about that lifestyle. And first of all, let's talk about getting 3 pounds of round steak for a quarter. After I went to the store this morning and paid $10 for a dozen eggs and $25 for like 6 chicken breasts. So yeah, obviously a different time. But just that lifestyle, you know, obviously it's not glamorous, not enjoyable, but that was common back then. These towns all had their teams, and I believe we heard Davy Jones talk about it in his interview as well, or Smokey Joe Wood, that you know, if you were a baseball player, if you enjoyed baseball and were good enough, you got on your town team or factory team, whatever the case may be. And a lot of clubs did this. They basically just barnstormed around and, you know, lived off the land and would scrounge enough money to pay for provisions, charging admission as they play other town teams. And, you know, again, rough life, not glamorous, but at the same time, it strikes you as almost endearing. I mean, you know, and actually freeing. You're just going, doing something that you love, barely making enough to make ends meet to eat, eating the same stuff every day, the ground steak or ground round, which apparently was the only thing this guy knew how to cook. You know, it's stealing farmers' apples as you could, and, you know, kind of a Robin Hood type lifestyle, but one that's very intriguing and you know, would be a lot of fun. I think as somebody who, you know, baseball was not my sport. I did play. I was, one coach told me, I'll never forget this. He's like, Crooks, you've got a 400 swing and a 200 batting average. You know, so I was adequate, nothing special. Football was my sport, obviously, and obviously, you know, and I boxed too. Of course, was better at boxing than baseball, but I still enjoyed the game. And despite my ties to those other two sports, especially coaching football for so long, 35 years now, baseball has always been and will remain my favorite sport. So yeah, I would have definitely loved that lifestyle. But enough of me. Let's get back to Sam.
How long would you stay away from home at one time?
Well, we were out several weeks.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What was the name of this team?
Wahoo.
Wahoo what?
Just Wahoo, that's all.
And you challenged anybody to a ball game?
Yeah, anybody.
Did you used to win most of those games?
Well, we done pretty well. Of course, it's pretty hard to win a game, you know. You go into a rival town and try to win a game, they have their own umpires, you know. You had to beat them to death to win, you know. Oh, yeah, that was tough.
So just imagine every town had their own Angel Hernandez on steroids, and that's what you'd have to overcome.
How did you come up with Cincinnati? You started off,
I started in the Canadian League,
yeah.
1899. And they sold me to Cincinnati in that fall.
The same year, all this
Yeah,
happened.
all 3 leagues in 1 year, and I hit over 300 in all of them.
That was also your first year of organized baseball.
Yeah, yeah.
You made the majors the first year.
I was only 19 then, you know. Of course, you're coming into a strange situation there, altogether different, you know.
Did you break right into that lineup?
Yeah.
Didn't they get a little resentful?
Well, they wasn't any too friendly, you know. They didn't ask you to come up and take batting practice or anything, you know. There was a little hostility there. I could notice that, all right. But
Wasn't Dummy Hoy on that team, too?
great ball player, great outfielder.
How did he communicate with his teammates?
Well, he could make a little throaty noise, kind of a squawky little noise that he got out of his throat somewhere. I don't know how he got it. We were going after a fly ball. I could hear this little noise. I knew he was going to take it, you see. But he was the originator or the instigator of that umpire giving the sign, a ball or strike. You see, he's up to bat. He can't hear. He can't talk. So he'd get up to bat and he'd have to look around to the umpire.
Oh.
You know, that's what started that.
There was only one umpire in a big league game in those days.
Yeah.
One umpire.
He's watching to see whether the man catches a ball or whether he fields a ball.
So real quick on Hoy. Hoy is generally credited with ushering in the use of umpire hand signals for ball, strike out, and safe. Again, because as a deaf mute, he was unable to communicate or hear in any way. And yeah, I mentioned it in one of the other diaries, but again, going back to that time period, you know, dummy is a very unpolitically correct, unflattering nickname, but yeah, that's how ball players were named by then. If you're a deaf mute, dummy was going to be the moniker that you got tagged with, just like if you came from the sticks, you were Rube, and you know, as I've gone over in other videos, you were, you know, Native Americans were chief. You kind of got a nickname based on either your ethnicity or a physical trait you had, or in the case of Hoy, did not have. But very interesting. I've heard, you know, this repeated in other occasions, that Hoy was kind of the reason that umpires went to signals. So there you have a bit of history, and really no way to prove or disprove that. I have tried to fact check it, but everything I've found has led to the fact that he was one of the catalysts for the umpires beginning to use hand signals versus just verbal communication.
Base runner cuts third base by 15, 20 feet. You know, just cuts across. And the umpire didn't see it. What are you going to do? They used to tell a story about Tim Hurst. He was an old umpire. He was a tough character, Tim Hurst. He was wise to this deal where they cut. Well, he was umpiring one time, and somebody, Jake Beckley, I think it was Jake Beckley, old Cincinnati first baseman. Jake come in there, you know, made a big slide in, you know, and got up, and Tim called him out, you're out. Then a big argument started, and cussing, you know, and all. What do you mean I'm out? He said, they didn't even make a play on me. He says, you big SB, he says, you got here too quick. He called him out. He said, you got here too quick. He knew he'd cut third, you know. That's the way he stopped him.
Yeah, you became an umpire, too.
Yeah, I umpired in the Coast League.
How'd you like being an umpire?
Thankless job. Thankless job. Tough job. Bench over here, and they're all watching you, you know, like a hawk trying to get something on you. It's a lonely thing, you know. Those were rough and tough days, you know, in those days. Things were different.
What was different?
Everything was different. You didn't have the hotels.
You didn't stay in the best hotels then?
Ball players in those days were considered pretty rough, you know. You go in a dining room in a good hotel, pretty as good as you could get. But they always shoved you way down in the corner somewhere, you know. There's the ball, comes the ball player, down in the corner. And they're down there and couldn't get any waiters, you know. Well, did you ever hear of Kid Elberfield?
Sure.
With the Yankees up on the hilltop? Tough little guy, too. Well, this Elberfield, he said, I'll get you some waiters, fellas. And they had, down in those days, they had all tile floors, you know, little square tiles, you know. So he took one of the plates, he sailed it up in the air, you know, and it come down in a million pieces, you know, hit that cement tile floor, you know, scattered. He had 4 or 5 waiters around there in no time.
So Elberfield, also known as the Tabasco Kid, was a notorious instigator back in the Deadball era. A volatile personality and story very on point for him. And again, guys like Elberfield or Y ball players had that reputation in the early days of the game. And we've heard that mentioned in the Davy Jones interview and reaction as well, that Davy Jones lost his high school sweetheart because of the fact that he chose to follow the path of becoming a ball player. And that story has a happy ending, and if you haven't heard that, I would suggest you go back and listen to that Deadball Diary, which is the first one we did. Great story about how love can come full circle. But again, yeah, ball players did not have a good reputation during the Deadball days. Very few of them did, at least.
But that's the kind of things that happen, you know, those things. They stand out in your memory. So
The ball players were pretty rough in those days.
yes, they were rough. It's spiky, you know. In time that you went around those 3 bases, you've been somewhere. Because they were stepping on your feet and they were giving you the elbow, you know, and the hip, and, you know, it was a tough trip around there.
And men would play with injuries that they would not play with
Yeah,
today.
you get spiked. Spiking, they're talking about Cobb spiking. Cobb never spiked anybody. If they got in the way, that's their own lookout. And those infielders are supposed to take care of themselves. If they got in the way and got nicked, why, they never said anything. They just chew the back out of their mouth and slap it on there and wrap a handkerchief around and go on. They didn't think anything of it. But now, if they get a little scratch, why, they take them to the hospital.
You didn't have the kind of clubhouse training facilities that they have today, did you?
No, they got swirling baths and everything else. Well, you had a trainer, but, you know, he just rubbed you down. But then put some, what they used to call go fast on you. Take a bottle of Vaseline and a bottle of Tabasco sauce, you know how hot that is, and mix that together. That's hot. They put that on you. Boy, you start sweating, and boy, you're on fire. Gee. Yeah.
What was your highest batting average?
378.
378.
And I never come close to leading the league. Cobb and Jackson were hitting 400.
You saw Jackson play a lot.
Oh, yeah.
He was a real good hitter.
Oh, he hit a ball.
So just 2 quick points there. Again, this is one of the few times you'll hear someone defend Cobb, but it's been repeated too. Cobb was notoriously remembered for sharpening his spikes, and there's no evidence that he ever did that, and intentionally going in to cut ball players, and basically he just was playing the game the way it was played at that time. You were expected to cede the right of way to the base runner, and they were just going and sliding. If you got in the way, that was on you. There is, though, one picture of Cobb that exists. It's a picture of him going into home plate, and I forget who the rival catcher was. But he's going in. It looks like he's delivering a wrestling-type drop kick because he is going in spikes first, and his spikes are almost at the level of the opposing catcher's upper thigh to groin. And that's a picture that's probably easy to find on the internet. So, you know, was Cobb a dirty player? Probably to a degree, yes, but at the same time, that's the way the game was played back then. And then this interview was recorded in March of 1964. Of course, the book released in 66, and Sam Crawford passed away in 1968. So interesting, even in that time, he's kind of lamenting about how ball players were not as tough in the modern times as they were in his day. So I'm very curious as to what his thoughts would be fast forward almost 60 years to now about ball players playing hurt. Now, obviously, stakes are much higher now in terms of how much ball players make, but even back then in the mid 60s, there was a whole ball players weren't as tough now as they were in my time vibe going on, and I'm sure players from the 60s say that about ball players today. So
As hard as anybody ever hit a ball, I think. Even Babe Ruth. They claim that he hit one in the old polo ground. You've seen the polo ground. Double deck, and then the roof. He hit the old ball over the roof. Wow. You know, it's a pretty good wallop to hit it in the lower pavilion, and a little better to hit it upstairs. But he hit it clear over the roof.
Yeah.
With the old ball. He reminded me Ted Williams. He's built it just about like Ted Williams, long and rangy. Not muscular, but just had the natural swing.
Did you ever see Mays play?
Yeah, I saw him.
How would you compare him to the old ball players?
Oh, he'd be all right with any of the old-timers.
Wonder how Cobb would have reacted under the circumstances, because Cobb was a Southerner, and he always remembered he was a Southerner.
He never forgot it either. He always had a colored boy he could kick around, run in there, and do things like that. I very seldom mention Cobb, you know, but he never had a friend in baseball.
Yeah, I know.
You know that. That's a terrible thing, you know. Play up there 20 years and never have a friend. That is not right.
Cobb said when he first came up, you know, he didn't get along with any of the ball players on the team.
He didn't want to get along with
Yeah.
the ball players. He come up when we were damn Yankees, you know. He led that Atlantic League down there, I think down there in Augusta or somewhere down there. He was pretty cocky, you know.
He said he was treated pretty rough.
Yeah, but why? Well, there's two sides to this thing. Why? Why was everybody? There must have been a reason for it. We're not cannibals or heathens or anything. We're all ball players together trying to get along. And somebody comes in there and disrupts the whole situation. Those damn Yankees, things like that.
He was still fighting the Civil War.
Yeah, it was a terrible thing. He had a book, you know. He wrote a book. He had a book. Too much I in there, I thought. The big star, you know, the big star.
Babe Ruth was a big star.
Yeah, although he's different.
Babe Ruth was a big star, and everybody loved him.
Yeah. Yeah, so like Walter Johnson was a speaker and stuff, you know, a good fellow. Cobb wanted to be the whole thing, all the time, all the time.
Evidently, as he got older, Cobb mellowed and was...
he mellowed just so Mother Nature mellowed him, that's all.
Yeah.
You know, they talk to me about Cobb. I always say he was one of the greatest ball players ever. I don't think he was the greatest ball player ever lived. I think Hannes Wagner was the greatest ball player ever lived. But I mean, all around ball player. Cobb could only play the outfield. Hannes could play outfield, infield, anything. Could run, you know, a big bow-legged guy could run like a scared rabbit.
Yeah.
Steal bases, hit, ever throw, wonderful arm. He knew what to do. Never made a mistake.
Yeah, now
you know, it's a treat, you know, to see ball players like that. You know, I saw them in their prime.
Yeah. You saw some mighty good pitching, didn't you?
So again, echoing kind of, especially with the damn Yankees reference. Now, I think it's interesting. Ritter, I think, kind of goads him a little bit here to go down a more negative path for Cobb, which he gladly follows. But yeah, Cobb not well liked even amongst his teammates, which is sad for him. But again, he was a product of his environment. Obviously, growing up in a very racist South, and at that time in history, and he came to the American League or to baseball with a chip on his shoulder, as Davy Jones also points out in his interview when he's asked about Cobb, how Cobb had a gun on him when they were going on a road trip, and how he basically said he would use it against anybody that any of the damn Yankees that got fresh with him, and that is kind of echoed here by Crawford, that Ty Cobb basically is kind of Ritter leads him to say was still fighting the Civil War. But a great ball player, and it's interesting too that Crawford puts Wagner ahead of Cobb. He's not the only ball player that does that, and his reasoning was based on the fact that Wagner could play multiple positions, infield and outfield, which is interesting as well. That was valued even back in that time, and Wagner would be one of those ball players today that would be invaluable because he was athletic enough to play short, and could also play in the outfield and at the hot corner and probably first base as well. But again, Cobb making no friends amongst players who were his peers back in the day, and Crawford does little to hide his dislike for Tyrus in this one. One other thing about Wagner, he was discovered by basically accident Harry Pulliam, who at the time, who would later go on to become the president of the National League, and unfortunately committed suicide in 1909, which many people tie back to the Fred Merkle the Fred Merkle incident in 1908, in that playoff game where Pulliam had to make the ultimate decision. And I'm not going to get off the rails and go into that, but maybe that will be another Deadball Diaries we do about Harry Pulliam and that whole Merkle incident. But Pulliam at the time had made the acquaintance of Barney Dreyfuss, who owned the Louisville Colonels, later to merge with another franchise to become the Pittsburgh Pirates, or Pittsburgh Alleghenies, I believe they're called initially, in 1900. And while the Louisville team was on a road trip to Brooklyn, Pulliam relented to some constant nagging he'd been getting from a minor leaguer who was from Kentucky, who told him about this bow-legged baseball player in the minors. It was phenomenal, and Pulliam took a train ride finally to New Jersey to watch Honus Wagner play, and actually took him back to Louisville after reaching out to Dreyfuss and securing a $2,100 fee to purchase him. So again, that's how many of the ball players were discovered in this time period by chance, and there's odds that there are many ball players who could have played in the major leagues at a high level that went undiscovered, and Wagner obviously was not one of them. Went on to become again one of the all-time greats, and in Crawford's estimation, the greatest ball player of that time period.
Walter Johnson.
Were you playing the day Walter Johnson first pitched his major league game?
I beat him. Not being egotistical, I hit a home run off him that first day. I think we beat him 3-2.
First game he ever pitched in a big
American League. You heard of Quintillion, Joe Quintillion?
Sure.
You know Joe? You know of him?
Sure.
Well, he was managed in Washington. I think that was 1907.
Yeah.
We were after the pennant then. That was our first pennant. But Joe was always kidding. He was a kidder, And Walter had just reported, from Idaho or somewhere. Joe told us, he said, as we come off the bench, and he says, well, boys, I got a big apple knocker who's going to pitch against you guys today. You want to watch out for him. He's got a swift. He's plenty fast. He told us that. And here's Walter. He's just a string of a kid, I guess he was only about 20. Tall, lanky. Didn't have a curve. But he had that fastball. That's all he pitched. And we had a terrible time to beat him. And we needed that game, too.
Just fastballs.
Just so, yeah.
Evidently.
He didn't need any curve. But Walter was a wonderful man, too. He wouldn't hit anybody. He was always afraid he might hit somebody. Wonderful guy.
That ball was fast.
Yeah, he was fast. The fastest I ever saw. He reminded me of these, you've ever seen these pitching machines?
Yeah.
Compressed air things? Well, I batted against those things, and it's a peculiar thing. The batters were afraid of that machine because they could gear that thing up so that ball, boy, it was like a bullet, It swished. That's the word I use, swish. When it went by you, see? Well, that's the kind of a ball that Walter Johnson pitched. He had a swish on it.
What was Rube Waddell like back in the Western League in 1899?
Oh, he was just like a big boy. You could take him by the hand and lead him around anywhere, you know. You see, there's a story that Connie Mack used to pay him in silver dollars, you know. They give him a lot of silver dollars, you know, load him down. Thought he had a lot of money.
So let's just fact check that, because we had a fact check with Davy Jones on Walter Johnson as well. So Sam, not quite accurate in that game. He did face Johnson in the first game that Johnson pitched. However, well, actually, yeah. So what happened in that game is Crawford did hit a home run off Walter Johnson, and maybe he's going by the fact that it was a go-ahead blast, but at the time, well, and honestly, I guess you could say technically he did, but the final score of that game was 3-2, and Detroit rode to victory on a one-run single run in the ninth inning, and Washington came back to score a run in the bottom of the ninth, making for the final score of 3-2. It was 2-1 actually going into the ninth inning. Johnson did not pitch the ninth inning. He was taken out after 8, and Long Tom Hughes finished the game and gave up what ultimately would be the winning run. However, Crawford would have been credited with the game-winning RBI based on that 8th inning home run. So I guess you can say, you know what, I guess we'll give him that. He did beat Walter Johnson because the game was never tied after Crawford gave the Tigers a 2-1 lead. So I retract that. He didn't account for the last run scored in that game, which was again a 3-2 Detroit victory, but he did get the go-ahead run on an 8th inning home run, which gave the Tigers a 2-1 lead at that time. So we will fact check that as correct, because technically that was the game-winning blow, and that's what would have credited the game-winning RBI. All right.
Was he as wacky as he turned out to be later?
You'd pitch a game and you wouldn't see him for a week. You don't know where he is, out playing with the kids or gone fishing or something. They'd have a game advertised for Sunday, you know, and Rube Waddell was going to pitch. Here comes Sunday, and a pretty good, you know, little town, little bleachers and everything, packed. Where's Rube? No Rube. Well, we're going along. Pretty soon, I hear something up in the grandstand, and here people are yelling, "Here comes Rube, here comes Rube." We go right down through the stand, you know, and jump down in front, you know, clubhouse down center field, starts off down, across the diamond, taking off. In about 5 minutes, he'd come out of there, you know, and, all right, let's go. Oh, I used to get a kick out of him. Good pitcher, you know, big, raw bone, 6'2" or 3". But if you didn't say anything to him, he would get, what do you say that word? Lackadaisical or some, you know, he'd, you know, just fooling along. If you didn't say anything to him. But if you got him mad, you know, if you rode him and got him mad, then he'd go to work. And I never forget Cobb. Cobb would go on the bat and he'd say, "Now don't get him mad when I'm up there. Don't get him mad while I'm up, while I'm up to that." He was afraid Rube would get mad, you know. Well, we used to do everything to distract him, you know. Even Jennings, you know, manager.
Yeah.
Jennings. Go to the dime store and get toys, rubber snakes, or Jack in the Box, you know, the foot jumped out, all stuff like that. And he'd go on the first base coaching line and he'd set them down, see, on the grass. And, "Hey, Rube, look." Rube looked over and kind of grinned. Do everything to distract him from his pitching. Now, you wouldn't, you know, those things really happened, you know. Those things really happened. It's psychological, a lot in the mind.
A lot of baseball's in the mind.
Yeah.
And, you know, Waddell, real quick, I really wish, I mean, Waddell, of course, died, ironically, on April's Fool Day April Fool's Day in 1914 at the age of 37 of tuberculosis. I wish there were somehow surviving interview footage, and obviously there was no audio recording back then, of Rube Waddell. It would have been a fascinating interview to listen to. There is a very good book on Rube Waddell, and I think at some point I'll do a Deadball Diaries just based on that book. But, the story Crawford tells, 100% accepted fact that Waddell loved to chase fire engines, could easily be distracted. Opposing managers brought new puppies to the ballpark, and as he mentioned, Jennings with his toys and anything to distract Rube. He was a big kid at heart, and obviously mentally as well. He was definitely, I think you can say without much hesitation or doubt, a special needs individual who, quite frankly, living in modern times, his participation in sports might possibly just have been limited to playing in the Special Olympics, because he, by all accounts, again, was a very, very much mentally challenged in that respect, to where he probably had some form of condition, possibly on the autism spectrum, who knows, but definitely a character that could have only existed in that place and time, and I never ever get sick of hearing stories about Waddell.
Were you superstitious?
Not too much. Not too much. The only thing is I wouldn't walk under a ladder, that's all.
What about on the ball field?
No, not so much. I've seen a lot of them superstitious. Even butterflies flying across the field. A big red butterfly, you've seen those. Sure. They're called monarchs. Or a white butterfly, you've seen white butterflies. They mean something. A red one meant something and a white one meant something. And the manager would look out and he'd say, boy, oh boy, oh boy, there goes a red one. Things like that. They believed that stuff. Really believed it. So named Bill Armour used to manage Cleveland. Very superstitious, The bats, we used to lay the bats out, If the one was laid a little bit crooked, he'd holler at the bat boy, hey, take that hickey out of there, He'd go nuts if he saw a cross-eyed boy.
Really?
Oh, Jesus. We used to try to find a cross-eyed boy for a bat boy. I said, gee, there's our bat boy. We didn't give a damn, Bill look at him. My God, he'd have an expression on you think he's going to die. Get rid of him. Get rid of him. Leave him stay here, but I don't want to keep him out. Keep him out of my sight. I don't want to see him.
Yeah.
Oh boy, what a superstitious guy. Gee. And we'd laugh, I'd get a kick out of that if we could just find a cross-eyed bad boy. Oh boy. We had a lot of fun.
Again, another big part of that time period, superstition, and it was rampant. Mentioned in other diaries, Connie Mack, and in fact the Fred Snodgrass tale about Charles Victory Faust. Faust, of course, John McGraw, superstitious, and that's why Faust, who would have been arrested had he pulled today what he did back then to get McGraw's attention, was retained by the Giants until McGraw basically just got sick of him, because his arrival happened to coincide with a winning streak, and McGraw kept him around because of that. Connie Mack had his own good luck charm. Louis Van Velt, I think was the name. A hunchback midget that Mack kept in the dugout as a good luck charm. And you hear, Crawford talk about the Cleveland manager here that did not like cross-eyed Pat boys. So whole lot of superstition going on in those stages of the game, which I guess was another piece of society at the time. But again, fun stories to listen to.
How'd you feel when after, you figure from 1899 to 1921, you were playing every season, right? 23 years. How did it feel in 1922 when you don't go to spring training, when you're not going to go out there and play?
Well, you don't feel any too good about it, of course. You see the parades, and all that, you kind of get a lump in your throat, I did.
So there you have it. Sam Crawford, some very good nuggets in there. Again, reiterating the lack of love for Ty Cobb, but I really liked his stories about, especially the last one about the cross-eyed bat boy, and just reminiscing about Waddell and whatnot. So again, a very interesting character, as reclusive as he was. Obviously very, very proud of his baseball career, as evidenced by the fact that despite his general dislike, for being around people, he was always willing to hand out his Sam Crawford Hall of Fame card. I went and actually searched for that memorabilia. That would be a piece of memorabilia I would absolutely love to have. Could not find it anywhere. It's probably a good chance that none of that exists today, but definitely would be fun to stumble across and add to the collection if I could afford it, which again, probably if one did exist, would not be very price friendly to just the average baseball memorabilia collector like myself. But that was Sam Crawford. Hope you enjoyed that. And again, really love doing these. It's fun to, especially hearing the ball players relay these stories in their own words. We did one fact check on Sam Crawford, which we can give a thumbs up on, despite the fact that I was trying to get too technical. But yeah, he did beat Walter Johnson technically. So Tigers up 2-1 at the time Johnson exited the game. But again, a good interview and good recollection, and especially the detail of some of the stories from his early days. The jobs he used to do emptying cuspidors, which, were spittoons, and to his barnstorming days riding around in an old wagon. So great listen, and again, so glad that these audio tapes have been preserved, or were preserved by Larry Ritter, for baseball fans now and in the future to enjoy. And if you want this whole audio book, again, it can be purchased on iTunes and audible.com as well. But we'll be back with more next. Probably, I'm thinking about doing Rube Marquardt, only because Marquardt is one that we can definitely fact check a lot of, because he was kind of castigated for some of the things he said in his stories in the book not being true. And in fact, many people think Marquardt does not belong in the Hall of Fame and is only in the Hall of Fame because of his appearance in this book, and that could possibly be true. And maybe we can do a little comparison and make our own determination. Was Marquardt an eligible or worthy Hall of Famer? And his peak seasons, definitely, for sure. I mean, he won 19 games in a row at one point. That was during the beginning of the, during the Charles Victory Faust era with the Giants, and he lost the first game he pitched after Faust was not around. So we can take a look at that and again, make our own determinations. Lefty O'Doul is another possibility. What I'm really leaning towards, though, is Hans Lopert, because a lot of these guys did really well in later life. Hans Lopert is one that did not. And it's sad, but at the same time very joyous listening to his interview, because his passion and love for the game, despite his dire circumstances in life, came through during his interview. And I won't, again, talk too much of that. But we'll see. One of those will be next. And again, appreciate you watching. If you like this and have comments, please leave a comment. Hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more of this. This is Anthony with Bleacher Bums Gaming. Hope you all have a great Saturday, and we will talk to you later.